I'm building a bushcraft themed survival game called Once Upon a Swagman, and I've been spending a lot of time getting the general vibe and atmosphere of the game right, and I think I'm actually doing a pretty decent job on that front. The general terrain, ambient sounds, the weather system, and the ocean, I think create quite a nice environment to just be in, which is a major focus of this game. I want it to be a relaxing walking simulator just as much as it is a survival game. But I do also want the player to do stuff as they walk their way from town to town, and the ocean is going to play a key part of that. But right now, the ocean is just a bit barren. So over the past month or so, I added this whole ecosystem of fish and a semi-realistic fishing system that, at least in my opinion, just feels nice and satisfying to use. It just feels fun to flick the rod out and listen to the sounds as you cast and reel back in. The fights with the fish feel satisfying. And having the freedom to walk up the beach as you cast is really cool. So let's have a bit of a look at how I managed to get things to this point, and we'll look at the fishing system in more depth. So the first thing I needed to do was get some basic fish entities spawning and moving around in the water. And since I've already taken a sort of simulation approach to the terrain, tide, and ocean, this was actually pretty easy to do. My terrain system has a depth at function that will return the current ocean depth at a particular point based on the height map of the terrain and the current tide based on the time of the day. So all I really needed to do to get some basic fish swimming around is to spawn fish in locations that currently have a depth above 0. And then after they are spawned, they can also just keep randomly picking points that currently have a depth above 0 and move there. And this also allowed me to bias having bigger fish spawn in deeper water. Now this wasn't something I had originally planned, but since I can so easily calculate the depth of the water, I figured I could also get fish to swim down deeper into the water to create a more 3D feel by just scaling their size. If a fish is in deeper water, it can also pick a spot on the Z-axis and scale its size appropriately to give the impression that it is diving down or surfacing. And you can see that effect being applied on the rectangles here. So the basic setup here was reasonably straightforward, but I did end up spending a long time tweaking things and eventually got to this point with some basic fish sprites and some additional behaviors like fish trying to flop their way back to the water if they become stranded on land. And then it was time to work on the actual fishing mechanic. And what I really wanted here was to create separate individual simulated systems that would interact. What I mean basically is that I have my ocean here, which is a simulated system that exists independently of the fish, but the fish system can be simulated within that. Similarly, the fish are their own simulated system that isn't dependent on a fishing system, but I can create a fishing system that interacts with the fish system. So this fishing system would be the first skill in the game, which will be one of several different skill systems I intend to create. And the fishing system began simply by trying to make it so that the fish would see the mouse pointer location as a hook. They would become hooked on this hook, and then I would be able to move that hooked fish around by moving the mouse pointer. And this already achieves most of the integration required between the fish system and the fishing system. Now to fully flesh out a fishing system, it's mostly just about creating something that will decide the location of this hook. For example, how does the hook position move when the user casts the line, how it should move when a fish is hooked and the player is trying to reel that line in, and so on. So I don't really need to think about creating a whole fishing system, I need to really just think about creating a hook moving system. It's simple in theory, but there were a lot of small features and tweaks that took a long time, so rather than show you a bunch of tiny things step by step, let's just cut straight to the finished implementation and talk through the features. So you see this little dangly lure hanging from the fishing rod sprite I added? This is the hook position. Rather than the hook position being wherever the mouse pointer is, now it is wherever this sprite is. And to create a casting system, what I did was add these two power bars. To cast, you first hold down the mouse to set your casting power. This is supposed to emulate putting the rod back over your shoulder. Then when you let go, a secondary accuracy bar will pop up. And the idea is to try and click when the bar is dead in the center to get a perfectly accurate cast. And this step is supposed to emulate when you flick the rod forward. At this point, the hook will fly to the calculated cast position, and a line is drawn between that position and the tip of the rod. An important addition here is that this drawn line can have slack. For example, if I walk toward the hook position, it will generate slack in the line. And when I try to reel the hook in, it will first reel in all of the slack before it actually starts affecting the hook position. The importance of this is that in order to feel fish bites, there needs to not be much slack on the line. So it's something you need to manage, and the slack also comes into play when fighting fish, as we will soon see. So I can cast the line out and the fish will be attracted to the lure if they get close enough. They will then bite, which causes the screen to shake, and at this point I can set the hooks by clicking, and that starts a fight. This then becomes a balance of slack and tension. You quite simply just hold the mouse down to reel in, but if you reel as the fish is fighting, it will create tension on the line, and if there is too much tension, the line will snap. But if you let the fish take too much line, eventually you will also run out of line and the fish will also snap the line. Bigger fish naturally are much harder to reel in than the smaller fish. As well as timing your reeling, you can also actually move around during the fight. So it is also possible to strategically position yourself to help move the fish closer to the shore. If you manage to get the fish up onto the shore, then it will stop fighting and you can reel it in easily. At the moment, catching the fish just releases it and it will flop its way back to the water. I've also recorded a bunch of sounds for the fishing system as well. I recorded my actual fishing rod to get the swish sound of the rod flicking, the bail opening and closing, the line dragging when the fish is fighting, and the sound of the reel spinning as you reel in the line. I recorded these in my walk-in closet, which looked absolutely ridiculous, but the result turned out quite nicely, I think. I actually find it quite satisfying to just walk along and cast the line at nothing. And since the primary goal in this game is to walk, I don't want the walking portions of the game to just be a boring chore. Even with just this one system in place, you can now just cast your line out as you walk, which is just kind of fun to do idly. But it can also be practical because you might be able to actually catch some food as you walk as well. And with the core mechanics of the fish and fishing system in place, it is now going to be really easy for me to expand this with more content. For now, I've just drawn one fish sprite that I'm reusing, but I can easily add lots of different types of fish with different behaviors. I can add different rod types, skill progression, perks, challenges, and so on. So this is Once Upon a Swagman, and it's available to wishlist now on Steam. If this game looks interesting at all to you, it would be a massive help if you could give it a wishlist or subscribe here. And I hope to see you back here again for the next video.